This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. We're here at the 2019 BioCeuticals Research Symposium, speaking with Justin Sinclair, my good mate. How are you, mate?
Doing really well.
Justin, cannabis. It's popularised, and we're well aware of the effects, positive effects that it has on managing cancer, symptomatology, pain, and other chronic sort of arthralgias mainly, and it tends to get pigeonholed into that. But there's other areas where cannabis can be useful in managing not just pain but other things as well. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little bit of a brief insight as to where it's useful?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, look, the Australian government, particularly the TGA, released a bunch of guidances on what conditions would be considered appropriate for medicinal cannabis. So we've got chronic pain in adults, and that can,
that's everything.
It's everything. But generally, what they want to see is patients that have been non-responsive to typical therapy, or the side effects of that therapy have been too great. Yep. And that generally is a proviso for going through the SASCAT-B process. Fibromyalgia, neuropathic pain, all those types of things would fit within that. And then you've got your multiple sclerosis, so spasticity and multiple sclerosis, right. Palliative care, the refractory epilepsy, so looking at things like Lennox-Gastaut or your Dravet syndrome. So these are the main types that are, and chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. So they're the main five, but there have been a lot of doctors that have been able to actually get patients through that would classify as having chronic pain secondary to or a major condition like fibro or endometriosis. Right. So that's something that we're seeing as well. So it's the chronic pain aspect and the fact that it's not being managed by standard treatment that would actually make it appropriate for a doctor to put in a SASCAT-B.
And so there's two things here we have to go. So the first thing is when you're talking about refractory conditions, mm-hmm. neurological is one issue. Let's concentrate on pain. Mm-hmm. Speaking with you at the United in Compassion Symposium just recently at Tweed Heads, and there's resistance in the pain specialists to prescribe cannabis, even when the drugs aren't holding or aren't treating their patients well. Why?
It's a really good question. I mean, there is, I think, personally, enough evidence. Many doctors, many researchers believe there is more than enough evidence. I mean, here's a plant that has not had much research done on it because of prohibition since 1937, and it's still probably the most published and researched plant on the planet. Yeah. The National Academy of Sciences obviously released their findings with significant support for chronic pain, and the TGA obviously has as well, in so much as producing a guidance on it. But then you've got the Faculty of Pain, doctors that have come out and said that they don't believe that there's enough clinical evidence. And I just find that, interesting is an interesting word, but one of the things, let's look at some things. I mean, patient experience, this is something I think that's really important. It's often forgotten in evidence-based medicine. Yeah. So most of the major studies that they've looked at in overseas jurisdictions, so some great papers by Sexton and others that have shown that when in medicinal jurisdictions that medical cannabis users, what do they use it for predominantly? Pain. Yeah. Okay. Yep. So then we've got the study that we did, the survey that we did, published in BMC CAM in January. Mm-hmm. So that looked at 15 different modalities or strategies that women used to manage their symptoms of endometriosis. Cannabis was one of them, and it was the highest self-reported for pain, 7.6 out of 10. And 56% of the cohort that used cannabis illicitly, so illegally, mind you, not even a standardized product of known provenance, were able to reduce their pharmaceutical medications by 50% or more. Why would these patients be making this up? Yeah. What have they got to gain? What would a chronic pain patient have to gain by using medicinal cannabis and say it's working when people think there's not enough clinical evidence? And it's worldwide. I mean, worldwide, the majority of patient experience is based on pain. So I just think that, there's more from the evidence base. There's much more. I mean, yes, we need our RCTs, We've got quite a few of them already. We've got the National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine report, kind of professional crew, that support its use. And then you've got the multitude, hundreds of thousands of patients around the world that are using it for chronic pain.
Yeah.
So what, they're lying?
Yeah.
It's a bit interesting.
Like, it's kind of like, do you laugh or do you cry or scream? Because it's just, it's really annoying the hell out of me with patients.
Yeah.
Particularly when you and I, we spoke to that young lady, Morgan, who had Crohn's disease. Get to that a little bit later. But just first, doctors, pharmacists, specialists will be well aware of that riff that we say, SASCAP-B, bang. What is SASCAP-B?
So the Special Access Scheme, Category B. So there's 4 major ways that patients can legally access medicinal cannabis in Australia. The first would be the Special Access Scheme Category B. So this is for unapproved medicines. So literally what we see in Australia currently is that cannabis is a approved, unapproved medicine. And that's why it has to go through the Special Access Scheme Category B. There's the Category A, which is for terminal illness. And that's not being used a great deal simply because it's actually quicker for doctors to put through the SASCAP-B. Then you've got the authorised prescriber. So that would involve a medical practitioner, a specialist, actually going through a much more rigorous process, which actually involves an ethics committee, which allows them to actually prescribe for a set condition, and they don't have to put in as much paperwork, because every single patient that goes to see a doctor for a Special Access Scheme Category B application is a new application. And then finally there's the CTN, CTX for clinical trials.
Right.
So they're separate. So they're the 4 major ways. But the Special Access Scheme Category B has been the majority access pathway for most patients in Australia. And I think we're currently sitting at over 4,000 applications that have been successfully approved. Whether all of them have actually been using the product is not yet fully known, because I've known of several patients that have actually been approved, but then because of the significant cost of the standardised product that's largely being imported from overseas, it's cost prohibitive.
Okay, so again, a double-pronged question. We're looking with the SASCAP-B, the prescription of a drug, and so it's obviously by medical practitioners. What's the relevance of naturopaths and other natural health practitioners having to know about cannabis? Where will it fit into their practice, guidelines, issues, meaningfulness?
First one is interactions. I mean, here it's a funny thing, because here we've got an example of a botanically derived standardized herbal medicine that's actually prescribed by doctors, and naturopaths and herbalists are not allowed to. And that's, it is as it is. But the important thing from a clinical point of view is interactions, one. So there's pharmacodynamic interactions, particularly with THC, so with other stronger sedatives like benzodiazepines, opiates. That's considerable, needs to be considered. There's potential pharmacokinetic interactions. So particularly when we start looking at CBD, I mean, I know a lot of people have been, CBD is a bit of a buzzword at the conference at the moment. There's been some great talks that have discussed it. But the reality is that there is potential for it working on different cytochrome P450 pathways. So things like, your 3A4, 3A5, 2C9, etc. So any drug that basically gets put through there, it can inhibit. So obviously that can be a problem. They've seen, actually, I think it was in the trial on intractable epilepsy, with kids that were taking really large amounts of CBD. I mean, we're talking 100 milligrams and higher, that there was clobazam, I think it was, that was actually increased.
Right.
So that can cause, obviously, then adverse effects of that drug. So that's something that, from a clinical perspective, practitioners, natural practitioners, naturopaths, etc., need to be aware of that. And then the other thing is that their patients are going to be using it. So it's very important to understand how cannabis works on the different receptors. CBD, it works on 5-HT1A, TRPV1, and all the different mechanisms of inflammation and pain management, so that they can actually understand what herbs to use, what supplements to use that might be of benefit. But from a safety perspective, I think it's incredibly important. And it's the other thing too is, it's not to say that in the future things might change. and that naturopaths or herbalists may be able to prescribe things like CBD down the track. I mean, the World Health Organization has, in a pre-review report that they've put together, suggested that they recommend descheduling CBD altogether because there's no risk of dependence or abuse. Now, whether or not that would happen, I don't know. It's been a recommendation. It hasn't been endorsed yet, but that would change the scenario because CBD currently in Australia is Schedule 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're looking at interactions, though, and then you look at the American or Canadian or what is it, Portugal, countries where cannabis is legalised or decriminalised, depending on their framework, are we seeing issues? Are we seeing these interactions with medications? I know you speak about high doses, but you can take you can take Flagyl, and all you got to do is put a little sticker with a red box saying "Don't take alcohol with it."
Yep.
Huh? So what's the real issues with interactions? What are the real concerns that we should have about cannabis use?
I think it's a cautionary tale, isn't it? I mean, it's always about the more you know going into something, at least you can be aware that it could be an issue. But at the UIC Symposium, Dr. Russo actually gave a really good talk, and he published a paper, I think it was McCallum and Russo, later, or last year, 2018, that actually looked at prescribing. And they had said that whilst it's very important to monitor for herb-drug interactions, which effectively it is, that in clinical practice it's something that they very rarely see. So I think, from practitioners that have actually got the experience that are practicing in jurisdictions, Jeffrey Hergenrath is another.
Yeah.
I mean, he's seen thousands upon thousands upon thousands of medical patients, and he says that in his clinical experience, it's something that he looks out for, but it's not something that he's seen a lot. So it's just about being clinically cautious, which I think is the most appropriate way forward.
Let's talk about NICM and your research into cannabis. So what sort of things are being researched with using cannabis as a medicine?
There's a lot going on at the moment. I mean, Janet, I think you're speaking with a little bit later. So Janet is doing a wonderful job leading the GBM trial. And that's one thing I think a lot of people don't understand. I mean, doing a clinical trial on echinacea or doing a clinical trial on vitamin C is nowhere near the animal that doing a medicinal cannabis trial is, just from a regulatory perspective. Huge kudos to Janet for managing that beast, because it's definitely a lot of work. But we're super excited. I mean, I'm a co-investigator on that trial with Janet, and we're really excited about crunching the data on that pretty soon. But I'm sure she'll talk to you more about that.
We'll be interviewing her later.
And then we've got, so from a NICM perspective, we've got a PTSD trial that's starting to be developed, which I'm quite excited about. And I know Jerome Saris, Professor Saris is as well. That's psychopharmacology and mental health is a really important thing for him. Then we've got another one that's just starting that we're looking at with MCI, so mild cognitive impairment. So CBD and mild cognitive impairment, that's something that Dr. Jen Steiner, or Genevieve Steiner, is going to be running. She's the neuro whiz at NICM. So,
right.
And then we've also just had discussions with an industry partner about looking at primary dysmenorrhea and medicinal cannabis. So that's in the works, but something that's really exciting.
Is that with Mike?
So Mike Armour is basically the one that would be leading that. And then my PhD project, which is actually looking at medicinal cannabis for endometriosis. So, and again, based mostly on the findings that we had from our survey, and we've just put another paper together that's just been submitted for peer review, which just looks at the cannabis subset data of the women that used it within the cohort. Again, incredibly exciting. And so my PhD research will take that one step further and actually look at doing a worldwide survey in jurisdictions where it's legal and medical, so that we know that they can get access to a good standardized, or hopefully standardized product. And then those that haven't, UK, United States, maybe New Zealand, just to be able to gather as much information as we can. But we're really data drilling to try and find what extracts or what dosage forms, what terpene ratios, what cannabinoid ratios the women are using, and self-reporting success, so that then we can then use that to inform a clinical trial. And then that's how I'll finish it, and then focus groups. So a bit of a mixed method.
Reminds me of the let's say the word comprehensive work that Dedi Mieri has done with regards to autism and things like that.
Yeah.
Not just using one extract, but this extract for that person, that extract for this person. I mean, that's personalised medicine.
Indeed.
I want to just ask you a brief question, though, about standardisation. Mm-hmm. Because we talk about cannabis, these, again, the riffing words, THC, CBD. Now there's the terpenes. Mm-hmm. There's other cannabinoids. So what's the issue with this entourage effect? And I've got a question. We just assume that this entourage effect is cannabis because it's been popularised, it's been bandied around. But I see that works exactly the same for echinacea, St John's wort, celandine. Are we talking the same deal here?
It's the same language, it's just different terminology. And I believe the entourage effect was coined by Doctors Ben Shabat and Raphael Mechoulam. And that's when they started doing a lot of their studies in the 60s, 70s, 80s around cannabis, and even earlier. But the fact is that plant phytochemical synergy has been known and practiced for thousands of years. We've got evidence, of course, of synergy between things like valerian and hops. We just term that phytochemical synergy. They've termed the interactions between different phytochemicals within the same plant as entourage effect. They're effectively the same thing, except with in the cannabis world, entourage effect is largely bandied about, but to a herbalist or naturopath, it's essentially just phytochemical synergy.
There's so much more to delve into here. Yeah. You and I, as we have discovered in the past, could talk for hours, but thank you so much for joining us on the stage at FX Medicine. There are a couple... There's at least one question here. Can I just throw the mic to the audience? I've done it again.
Love your work, Justin. It's just glad you're doing it. My question, bit of a personal nature. A family member has been prescribed cannabis oil. No dosage was given. His GP said just keep trying until it works.
Titrate.
I know, scary. Is there somewhere that he can go or we can go and find a dosage for him, to get the best out of what he's got?
Look, that's a really interesting question. The reality is that should have been provided by the doctor. But generally it depends on the condition that's being treated. So typically, and particularly, again, McCallum and Russo in their paper talk about starting low, going slow, and titrating up until symptoms are managed, but side effects are not overly present. So it's that kind of idea where people are thinking, can I actually use cannabis in medicine and not get stoned? And that's yes, absolutely, that can happen. But yeah, they generally will look at starting at anywhere between 1.25 milligrams of THC to 2.5 milligrams of THC before bed, and then just titrating that up. But that is actually something that they should go to their doctor about. Yeah.
Is there another one over here? No? I've got a question then.
Fire away.
Does cannabis need to be heated to get the effect?
That's a good question. Decarboxylation. So when you were talking about cannabinoids, there are, again, Dedi Mieri's work has shown about 144 cannabinoids. There's major cannabinoids, minor cannabinoids. THC and CBD get the lion's share of the research, of course, but a lot of people might not know that they're actually acids or in an acid form in the plant. So THCA, tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, has a carboxyl group attached to it, and then when heat is applied to it, it decarboxylates, snaps off.
Chemistry.
And then now you've got the active molecule that will bind with CB receptors, etc.
Yep.
But the question that you ask is actually important because it suggests, are there other cannabinoids that can be used medicinally that don't require decarboxylation? And the answer to that is yes. So when we look at THCA, CBDA, others, and that's where we look at, say, the plight of Morgan, where you get a lot of these patients, particularly with autoimmune conditions that are, inflammatory based, and they juice the leaf and the whole flower. So by juicing that through, say, a wheatgrass juicer, Champion,
with really strong blades.
And not producing heat. So you don't want a centrifugal juicer because that could actually cause decarboxylation to occur.
Yep.
And then they're drinking, anywhere between 30 to 60 mils of this juice a day, and she's being able to keep herself in complete symptomatic remission effectively, whereas just weeks before she was in hospital and they were talking about, surgical intervention. So it is quite dramatic for some patients, but no, it doesn't require heat. That THCA is the precursor compound to THC, and then even other compounds which I think are quite fascinating, which don't get much airtime, is like CBN, cannabinol. So cannabinol is getting a lot of interest in the community, particularly in research and sleep, because it's quite sedative. So it's not as psychoactive as, say, delta-9 THC, and it's actually a degradation product of THC. So if THC is actually not stored correctly, it's exposed to too much light, or UV light and oxygen, it actually starts to degrade into CBN naturally, and so it has less psychoactivity and more a really strong sedative effect. So they're looking at using that in trials for sleep over THC, because some people don't like the stoned feeling, whereas cannabinol can provide that sedative activity without that major psychoactive impact.
So the herbalists, our hope is that the herbalists in the future will be able to go, yes, I have the 18-year.
Aged for 18 years, perfect. No, and that's that's an interesting one. But I mean, even that discussion about psychoactivity is quite interesting, because one thing that gets bandied around a lot too, to steal your term, is CBD being non-psychoactive, and that's actually incorrect because CBD we know has the ability to interact with 5-HT1A. That's for depression and anxiety. And when you look at the actual term of a substance that's psychoactive, it's anything that can actually change your mood, cognition, behaviour. So
I could go on. Can we go on? We've got one more. We've got two more questions. Keep going. So, sorry, I'm cutting you off. But
that's I prefer the term intoxicating or inebriant or something like that. THC, yes, it's a known. It has that stoned feeling. CBD generally, and they just use the term psychoactive, but from a purely, if we're being technically correct, it is actually psychoactive, but non-intoxicating. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we do have a question there.
For practitioners in Australia, can you recommend a good place that we can find out information, legitimate studied information? Are there any courses you can do? How can we be more knowledgeable about it?
That's a great question. So there are some courses that have been developed around Australia for the training of medical doctors. That they do not preclude a naturopath or herbalist to go to them and learn, so that they are available. Some of the good online resources, though, I mean, full transparency, I actually work on the scientific advisory board for United in Compassion. So United in Compassion is a advocacy group, patient advocacy group that's been around. It's run by Lucy Haslam and the executive team there. So the United in Compassion website actually we've had symposiums in the past that bring out leading world experts like Dedi Mary and Don Abrams and all sorts of others that come and speak. All of the talks are recorded. All of their slides are generally also provided. So for the 2014, I think we're up to our fourth now. They've all been filmed. And they're all there as a free resource. So just go to the website. Look at the previous events that we've had, and I mean, you're learning from the best minds. That's from around the world, whether it's cancer, whether it's dosage, whether it's safety, all of those topics from world leaders. So that would be a great starting point. I mean, there's 50, 60 hours of material on there.
And FX Medicine's there. Sorry.
So just following on from the phytochemical synergism, are there studies about synergism with other modalities? So, for example, hypothermia therapy in cancer?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, not that I'm aware of. But it's an exciting time in research at the moment. I mean, in my inbox that comes through at least 4 to 5 papers every week that are newly published on cannabis as medicine. So.
got a lung cancer patient, palliative, at home. She's got her own LED lights. You know, she's doing all that at home now.
Oh, wow.
She's also doing CBD. This is up on the Gold Coast, and I'm wondering if I should be advising possibly doing it together.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, that's something I'd be happy to talk to you about off camera, just, just for patient confidentiality, all those types of things. But yeah, no, that's there's so many people that that's one thing that we found. We estimate over 100,000 people are using cannabis illegally in Australia. Yeah, but that's the interesting point, is that even though we've got the legal pathways for doctors to prescribe, a lot of it's cost prohibitive, particularly to elderly patients that might not be working. So they just go back to the illicit market, and that's something that the government certainly needs to, I think, work hard to address. Yeah.
I got another question.
Yeah.
So, vitamin C is from citrus fruits and other things. Vitamin B is from your grains and meats, and irons from meats and things like that. Magnesium's from plants, and we isolate those and we use those as nutrients as nutritionists, and we use them in higher doses to get a therapeutic effect. What about certain isolates from cannabis that aren't psychoactive but might work on different serotonin receptors for, let's say, irritable bowel syndrome or something like that?
It's interesting, but then is it a herbal medicine anymore? And I mean, that's...
Oh, it's not herbal medicine anymore. No,
and
that's isolated stuff.
Yeah, and that's where I think a lot of the evidence so far that's being done is basically a standardized botanical extract. I mean, that's... for me, I think that's one of the more exciting things, is here's an example of the government that's actually allowed, okay, it's an approved medicine, if you will, but what is it? It is a standardized botanically derived herbal medicine that doctors are prescribing. Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing that I find that's interesting that no one talks about, the elephant in the room, is what about all the other herbs that are also botanically derived, standardized, and high quality assurance. And I think that's cannabis in a way is actually rattling the cage and a bit of a bridge to that, because whilst there is a growing body of evidence for cannabis, we've already got a very well established body of evidence for many other herbal medicines. And I guess the one that comes to mind is St. John's wort. The Lynn study, the Cochrane review, that basically sat there over how many RCTs, what were the 3 outcomes, better than placebo, as good as standard SSRI therapy with less
no
side effects. So from a risk-benefit analysis, surely that should be something that's utilised. So I think this is actually changing perspectives and perceptions of many people in the space. But I personally think, I'm sure that there are companies out there already, to get back to your question, working on single isolates or even pharmaceuticals that will look at adding different side groups and making it a new drug. And there's space for that. And there's space for that, but it's just not something that I personally am that interested in, because the full spectrum of the plant, being a natural practitioner at heart and loving pharmacognosist, I just think that plants, we don't give them the credit that they are. I respect that pharmacists and medical practitioners like to know exactly what's going in there, but we do. We do with herbal medicines, and I'm not sure that many of them understand the high quality assurance that we can actually provide in herbal medicine products in Australia.
Justin Sinclair, love what you're doing with your research, love how you care for your patients and that. Thank you so much for joining us on FX Medicine.
Always a pleasure.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew